Mark Consuelos' health declined swiftly as doctors delivered the confirmed cancer diagnosis. Kelly Ripa broke down weeping. They first registered the change like a misplaced note, small, everyday things that gave them pause. Mark would forget a line, lose his keys twice in a morning, or trail off mid-sentence as if the string of a thought had broken. Initially, the family shrugged it off. A demanding schedule, the pressure of work, the way life accelerates and jumbles the maps in our pockets. But when Mark lost more than just time, when his appetite dwindled to a few bites and his evenings dissolved into long, heavy slumbers, the laughter faded and left the room filled with longer shadows. The diagnosis came in its own peculiar language, clinical, direct, and somehow more personal than the family anticipated. Tests that had been arranged as a precaution uncovered a progression of disease none of them had foreseen. The word cancer hung in the air between Kelly and Mark like a searing plate, something that demanded caution, consideration, and a gentle tenderness to handle. This is a narrative about that week and the weeks that spread like shadows around it. The blur of hospital lights, the collapse on a rainy afternoon, the media that attempted to create a spectacle from sorrow, and the small, persistent rituals that prevented a family from fading into headlines. When Mark was first admitted to the hospital, the choice felt abrupt, because fear doesn't follow a schedule. One day you were talking about scripts and the dog's reluctance to be house-trained. The next, the color of your walls feels wrong for the mood you are carrying. The oncologist called it aggressive and described how the cancer had advanced faster than they'd anticipated. There was no melodrama in the clinic, only the measured cadence of people who had rehearsed delivering bad news without letting it warp into false hope. Mark, for all his bravado and the practiced ease he projected on camera, was human in a way television had never asked him to be. He received the news with a kind of quiet composure that could either be denial or a rare form of strength. "Okay," he said, which was not an insignificant word. Kelly observed him with the silent terror of someone who loves a person and understands how delicate the structures of daily life can be. The family came together with the awkward efficiency of those who love people intensely. The kids, Joaquin, Michael, and Lola, rearranged their schedules with a discipline that made Kelly both incredibly proud and secretly terrified. Friends were called to assist with the house. Michael balanced commitments to sit in waiting rooms and study. Lola compiled lists of questions for the doctors and placed them in her mother's hand like talismans. Mark was initially placed in a general ward, where the air was thick with antiseptic, and the world seemed distilled into careful procedures. The doctors went over options: chemotherapy, targeted therapies, palliative considerations. They spoke about likely trajectories and treatments that might slow the disease. No one gave guarantees. The medicine was a map of probabilities, and the shape of the future was still provisional. Kelly moved through the hospital like someone mastering a new trade. She asked questions with the persistence of a person putting together complex instructions. She memorized the faces of nurses and the rhythm of shift changes. She took detailed notes. She learned the names of machines and the general meanings of lab results. The world had turned into a vocabulary exam she could not afford to fail. The media appeared like a wave. Photographers positioned themselves at the hospital entrance. Commentators interpreted phrases into prognoses. Social media feeds swelled with solicitations and opinions. Kelly found herself inhabiting two spaces at once: the physical room where Mark rested, and a second virtual room made of screens and headlines. The photograph that showed Kelly leaving the hospital, head down and mascara streaked, would be endlessly repurposed. It became a symbol of distress and sparked 1,000 different speculations. They attempted to manage the narrative with a brief, carefully phrased statement, expressing gratitude for the concern, requesting privacy, and promising that the family would provide updates when possible. It was the kind of language crafted by people who grasped the press's hunger for drama and the family's need for space. But statements are a flimsy shield, words you toss like a blanket into a storm, hoping they hold. On the third night after admission, Mark's health worsened quickly. A fever shot up, his blood pressure fell, and the monitors that had been a steady hum became piercing alarms. Nurses hurried in, moving with the kind of practiced coordination that looks choreographed. When they moved him to the ICU, the family felt as if a lifeline had been severed and cast into a turbulent current. The ICU is a different landscape of fear. its small rooms and glass doors, and a rhythm that makes you lose track of time. Machines track every breath, tubes create a map on the skin. Voices are calmer, more surgical. The doctors clarified that the initial diagnosis was now complicated by a secondary infection and organ strain, the kind of chain reaction that can take even experts by surprise. They assured the family they were taking all necessary measures and that aggressive care might stabilize him. But once more, there were no promises. Kelly's world shrank. She moved in a tight orbit around the ICU bed, the glow of monitors creating halos and the scent of disinfectant a constant presence. She found a routine in small actions, adjusting a blanket, brushing a hair from her forehead, taking calls with one hand while keeping the other on his wrist. The children watched their mother and father like two poles of a compass, struggling to find their own direction. On an afternoon that started normally and then twisted into a crisis, Kelly stepped out of the waiting room to answer a phone call. She had been meticulously noting the names of friends and medical experts who might offer advice, and the to-do list felt like it was stretching into infinity. Then in the hallway, a wave of dizziness washed over her, and her legs gave out. The world turned white. She sank to the linoleum, and for a moment, everything went silent. A nurse checking charts caught her arm and sat with her, whispering simple words of comfort. She was given fluids. An attendant called to inform Mark's children. The collapse was not dramatic in its presentation, but was utterly devastating in its meaning. It wasn't a collapse meant for an audience. It was the result of a person pouring all their energy into keeping a family together and finally having nothing left to give. When a photo of Kelly being helped into an ambulance appeared on morning feeds the next day, reactions were varied. Some expressed empathy, others questioned whether the family had been careless. A chorus of angry commentators demanded statements from the hospital, from publicists, from anyone who would talk. Social media does not allow for the quiet space for grief. It demands verdicts. In that moment, the family's private struggle became a public spectacle. The headline writers used phrases like, "Kelly Ripa collapsed in tears," and "Mark Consuelos' health declined swiftly." The language was precise only in its sensationalism. The nuance, the exhaustion, the overload, the cascade of institutional procedures, all of it was filtered through a lens that craved certainty. In the ICU, time was measured in increments: blood draws, medication schedules, scans. Kelly tried to decipher the routines, to turn them into something she could act on. She learned to be the family's anchor and its public face simultaneously, a strange double life that felt like walking on a tightrope. In the quiet hours, she wrote letters and tucked them into Mark's clothes. Small, ordinary things that might feel like gifts later. Recipes, funny stories, reminders to water the plants. The doctors operated with a blend of urgency and caution. They tried targeted therapies and broad-spectrum antibiotics for the infection. The team consulted specialists, reran scans, and discussed protocols in hushed conference rooms. Medicine is often a negotiation between technology and the human body. They found themselves on both sides of that negotiation. Friends came in steady streams. Old co-stars sat for hours telling jokes and reading scripts aloud to fill the room with the normal cadence of life. Production teams arranged schedules so Kelly could stay off the air. Fans left notes by the hospital doors. Strangers sent food. These small acts built up into a framework of kindness that supported the family when the world felt like a tide threatening to pull everything away. As the days went on, there were small moments of relief. Mark would open his eyes and respond to a joke, or a machine would hum and show a trend line moving in a positive direction. These tiny shifts were treated like minor miracles. The children marked them with secret handshakes in the waiting room and by ordering takeout that tasted like normalcy. But the progression of the illness left little room for guarantees. There were setbacks, an episode of labored breathing, a surge of pain that no medication seemed to touch for a day, and the family sat on the edge of their seats, breathing in sync with the monitors. Kelly learned to make the small decisions that matter when the big ones are out of your hands. Which flowers to accept, which questions to ask a doctor now versus later, when to rest and when to watch. Conversations stretched late into the night about impossible logistics, wills, guardianship, the future of projects, the children's college plans. The practical tasks, arranging medical proxies, ensuring documents were in order, felt both intrusive and essential.
They tackled it with the straightforward business-like tone of people making a contingency plan. When Mark's condition stabilized, it did so with a quietness that took them by surprise. The combination of antibiotics, fluid management, and targeted therapy started to take effect. The fever broke. The monitors that had rattled them fell silent.